Welcome to Healthy Leadership 101. I'm the Reverend Renee Rahutsky, and I will be your instructor for this course. This is Module 1, Introduction to Systems Thinking. And basically, this is to give you an overview of what systems thinking is, why I think it's important, and a little bit of how it can be useful when you use it in your churches. So one thing I like about systems thinking is it really works well with our understanding of the interdependent web. And I love this quote by John Muir. When we tug on a single thing in nature, we find it attached to everything else. And that's part of what systems thinking is everything is interconnected. There's just not one single cause and effect. There's multiple ways of the aspects of our relationships and things interacting with one another. So again, this is an introduction to systems thinking. And I want to start out holding up a book by Peter Senge called The Fifth Discipline. And in the course materials that are on the website, I have a chapter out of his book, The Fifth Discipline, which talks about systems thinking and why it's important. I'll give you a brief little overview here, but again, I wanted you to get a little bit more depth about systems understanding and why it's especially important today. I heard recently that the skill that we need going into the next few decades is the ability to learn and unlearn and relearn. And so for me, having the system sensibility sort of understands that everything's related. Even if I'm unlearning something, it's still important. I'll still be using it. But also realizing that as as the world changes, we have to change along with it in response. So when we talk about the 5 disciplines, the first 4 disciplines are the idea of being a part of a team and learning as a group, to also work on what Senge calls personal mastery. But we kind of call this, spiritual growth, spiritual development, personal development. William Ellery Channing called it self-culture. But it's this idea of each one of us takes responsibility for our own learning. Another one of the disciplines is creating a shared vision. So, we can all navel gaze, but the idea is that we're learning and being a community together for some purpose that's greater than ourselves. And the vision is what's inviting us forward and inviting us to work together. And then the fourth discipline is understanding mental models. And I use the term sensibilities when I talk about mental models, about how we can think about our thinking, kind of. So for example, I tend to put different lenses on ways of viewing the world. So if I have an experience, I might say, I reacted a certain way. Somebody maybe said a comment to me that hurt my feelings a little bit. And so it's like, oh, what was that about? Well, the person was older than me, and maybe I felt like I was being diminished a little bit because of the age difference. Oh, it was a male. Maybe it's because there's a masculine-feminine difference. Oh, it was, somebody who has much more education than I do. So basically, having different mental models that we can lay over our experiences helps us to create a better understanding. So the systems thinking is the 5th discipline, and it's really the one that helps us to hold all of these different other disciplines in a way that keeps keeps us encountering them holistically. So we don't look at each thing as its own individual thing, but understanding that they're all interrelated. So my personal development is part of the greater congregation self-development. My personal development is part of being involved with my own personal mission as well as the shared mission of the group, and so on. So here's a little quote just to give you an idea. I wanted to give you a little taste of the depth of the reading, but Senge says that the 5th discipline integrates the disciplines, fusing them into a coherent body of theory and practice. It keeps them from being separate gimmicks or the latest organization change fads. Without a systemic orientation, there is no motivation to look at how the disciplines interrelate. By enhancing the other disciplines, it continually reminds us that the whole can exceed the sum of its parts. And as I'm reading this, I'm reminded about how often our congregations might be siloed in the different ministries of the congregation. Religious education might be really separate from social justice and separate from worship. And so part of the systems thinking is to encourage us to think about how all those parts are interrelated. And I'm also even thinking about, I live in Kent, Ohio, and we have the university on campus. And really in the past 10 years, I've noticed that the different departments interrelate with one another. So like the film students work with the theater students, and they also work with the journalism students, and they do videos for one another. And so there's this, the faculty has actually gotten together with the systems thinking sensibility and has invited sort of cross pollination between the different departments, which also used to be very much siloed. So again, this is some of these ideas have been around for a while, but there's been a lot of books in the past 20 years and a lot of thinkers in the past 20 years that have really developed this idea of systems thinking. So one of the shifts that we need to make when we think systemically is to move away from the Newtonian universe. So the idea of cause and effect. And this is a model of an atom in the old kind of pre-particle physics, where there was this idea of there was a nucleus and there were electrons that traveled in rings around the nucleus. And this is a model of the quantum understanding of a molecule. So instead of something that we can really wrap our heads around, nucleus, planet, electrons like planets going around it, there's this whole understanding of probabilities and how it's not just a mechanical relationship. The relationship is much more organic, even at that subatomic level. And I should also mention in the readings, I have optional reading, but I find this really interesting. And Margaret Wheatley has written a book called Leadership in the New Science, and there's a chapter from her book in the reading. So if that interests you, this whole idea of how quantum mechanics informs leadership development, there's a chapter there that you can read. So again, we're getting away from this sort of billiard ball cause and effect way of thinking, which is helpful, and it helps us to understand the universe. But really, that's just what we see. What happens at a deeper level is a little bit different. It's much more interrelated. And in the course materials, there's a couple of other optional videos you can watch just to kind of wrap your head around Newtonian physics versus quantum physics. Again, if that's interesting to you. So part of the idea of giving you the tool of systems thinking as leaders of congregations is to really to help your system reflect on itself. So, as individuals, we have this consciousness where our minds can think about our thinking. But as organizations, we don't have that same capacity as naturally to self-reflect. And the idea of using systems thinking, it creates a tool for we as organizations to reflect upon ourselves as organizations. And the other thing that systems thinking can do is really help us to get away from finger pointing when there's a problem, or looking for a scapegoat, or looking for a specific cause. It's really tempting to say, the pledge campaign failed. It's because our stewardship chair did a really lousy job. Or it's because, the minister's sermon on stewardship wasn't very good or something. There's a lot of factors that influence anything that happens in our congregation. So again, systems thinking gives us the language to be able to understand that. The other thing I want to hold up, and this is going to be a theme throughout this whole course, but it's important in our congregations, especially yours, that are paying really close attention to living missionally, to having a purpose, a sense of purpose in your congregation, and to organize yourself and direct your ministries in a way so that your mission is being served. And there's this wonderful quote that I love to share, is that your mission is what is hanging on the wall. Your system is what's happening down the hall. This is from a megachurch leadership guy. Theologically, we don't quite match, but he's a master of organizational development when it comes to churches. And for me, this quote means that, even with our best intentions, we have to make sure that the way we do church helps to support our mission. So we need to consistently look at the systems of our congregation and how they're working together and how well those are serving our mission.